the Managing Director and founder of the Test Factory. Kevin Beales is going to talk to us about going beyond knowledge tests and assessing employee behaviour and confidence. Over to you, Kevin.
Thanks so much, Don. Afternoon, everybody. So going through looking at different ways that knowledge tests are being used looking at ways that online tests are being used beyond knowledge tests to assess employee behaviour and confidence. I just want to kick off first of all with a question about how online assessments are being used within your organisation, and hopefully get a few responses that I can then reference in the remainder of the session. So I can just ask everyone to use the chair here of how you're currently using online assessments within your organisation.
I suppose, Kevin, that there's a balance which is, well, we're not using them, but we've got a slew of repeats, a slew of answers coming through, so let's see what people have to say. Horrific compliance assessments. Oh dear. What's some of the thoughts we've got there? Technical competency?
Yeah, I think there's probably quite a lot of what you would expect, and not surprising at all to see many responses referencing the dreaded multiple choice questions as they don't necessarily, although they may be highly effective. They're obviously something that's been with us for a long time, and hopefully today's session is going to be talking about ways that you can certainly go beyond the use of multiple choice questions, and certainly complement multiple choice questions with lots of other different forms of assessment. So that's great, some great things that I can reference as I go through the presentation. It's not at all a sales presentation. I'm just going to literally just take 30 seconds just to introduce the Test Factory and their credentials. We're online assessment specialists, providing solutions to a range of different clients, global clients from many, many different sectors, some of those that you can see up on the screen, delivering assessments in 20 different languages as customised solutions, and again you'll see some examples of that as I go through. Really, regardless of whether we're talking about a knowledge-based assessment or some of the others that I'm going to introduce, there's really three components, first of all, to assessment. I'm just going to fly through just some of the ways that people are using assessment. Bear with me. There's the component of the assessment itself. Obviously, the delivery of a test or a series of tests, which can be interspersed with learning. That learning can be based on performance, and all these tests and assessments can be highly personalised based on a candidate's data, for example, such as their role, so that each person sees different assessments, different series of assessments personalised to them, or perhaps depending on their answers, depending on their performance, depending on how many questions they're getting right and wrong, and what they might then see next. So various ways that, as I say, either a series of assessments with lots of different question types, from the dreaded multiple choice, being able to incorporate audio questions, true, false questions, and so on and so forth. That's obviously the easy bit. The next bit, where it starts to get a little bit more exciting, is the assessment outcomes. So as a result of the assessment, there's various things that can be done from that. First of all, things like personalised feedback, so personalised learning plans that can be based on the performance of an individual, can be recommendations of what they should do next as a result of their performance, or resources that are available that are being driven by the performance of an individual on the test, whether that be their score on the test, their performance on a particular topic, or even the questions that they get wrong. I can also link directly to the opportunity to enrol on classroom training, for example. The other kind of outcomes that can be incorporated, being able to provide acknowledgement and recognition, such as being able to provide certification, and also being able to provide alerts perhaps for a manager, for a learning development department, that are based on performance triggers, on how maybe an individual has performed a test, or maybe hot questions that they've got wrong that identify an opportunity to remedy. The third part is obviously the reporting and management information. And there's huge amounts of ways, and I'm going to just show you a few examples of different ways that can be displayed to all stakeholders, whether that be a candidate, whether that be the manager of an employee, or whether it be the learning and development teams. It can be reported really based on any amount of any data that's actually collected in an assessment, can be driven by reports on an individual's performance and perhaps their progress. This is an example of actually mapping that to a spidergram and showing strengths and weaknesses of an individual. Look at group performance, which groups are performing best. Groups may be based on a role type, a team, a branch, a part of the organisation. Actually seeing how the content itself performs. And there's the answer to that burning question that you've always had: how much tartar sauce is actually dispensed on a fillet of fish? For all that, there's lots of scientific evidence that suggests that when you're providing assessment, it actually enhances learning, it enhances the retention of knowledge, and that's particularly pertinent for the knowledge-based tests. But today, we're going to explore 7 other types of assessments outside of knowledge-based tests, which are used by some of our clients, sometimes on their own, sometimes incorporated with knowledge-based tests, which I provide some food for thought for your organisation. I'm going to start very simply with behavioural assessments, the simple self-assessment of behavioural skills. And this can be delivered in a number of ways. This can be delivered in true-false questions, asking an individual to self-assess their behaviour, asking them to rank themselves on a scale. But essentially, it is the individual assessing their own skills and behaviour, and then drive a number of reports, both potentially back to the individual and to stakeholders. They can be simple and effective because the outcomes are driven by self-assessment, so they become less subjective, and being able to then provide recommendations. It really engages in self-learning, because you're actually taking the individual's own perceptions of themselves and then providing them with potentially resources or ways that they can engage in their own development based on the results that they've given. And those results then are obviously far less subjective, because they're driven by the individual's assessment of their own strengths and weaknesses. Scenario-based questions. Questions that may not have a right or wrong answer. There may be a series of options, and each of those options may be right to varying degrees and may be graded appropriately. But those scenario-based questions then again provide reporting where this can map to strengths and weaknesses. On this particular spidergram that I showed before as well, it actually contrasts the individual's performance on scenarios against organisational desires. And so, although that's actually quite a complex report, it actually can provide and highlight some of the key differences between organisational desires and where an individual is currently. Third example that I'm going to share is group assessments. And we've seen increased demand, increased use of group assessments. This being an assessment perhaps for a team or for a location, such as a branch, a reseller, someone in the supply chain, may require multiple people to answer the questions within a single test. And basically allows within that test individuals to assign individual questions to some of their colleagues. So that you can collate information from a team in a single test, and again have the outcomes that get driven by that. One example to share where again this was used outside of knowledge-based questions is with Microsoft. Microsoft provide to their partners, essentially their resellers, where they can assess competencies and behaviours through an organisation. So individuals can assign individual questions to some of their colleagues, but collates all the data on Microsoft partner and provides feedback, personal recommendations and resources that in this instance actually maps against Microsoft's have a basic, silver and gold partner status, and demonstrates based on those answers where an individual organisation, where a reseller or partner may sit, and provides them with a series of recommendations and feedback so that they can develop themselves as a whole organisation as well as people individually. And really this group assessment can be used in any such scenario. We've got examples where it's used, for example, in retail space, where particular branches are able to answer information through a series of individuals and colleagues, and have a complete holistic view of the performance of that particular branch, again potentially against a benchmark. The next example I'm going to use is situational judgment tests. Situational judgment tests, well, I'm going to first of all just pass a question to you. Whether you use situational judgment tests or SJTs currently in your recruitment teams, and so how effective do you think they are or aren't in identifying the best candidates?
And we're clear that SJTs is situational judgment tests, and could you just give an example of that while people are putting together their answers, Kevin?
Yeah, so these are predominantly used in recruitment, and I'm going to share some ways that they can be used in learning and development, and I think a bit of a missed opportunity to use within learning development. They're basically highly effective at predicting behaviour and competencies. They take real-life scenarios that will judge, I'll talk through in a second, exactly how they're collated, but create real-life role-based scenarios that will judge best and worst performers and map to a competency framework. See the ones coming through there. Ryan, it is similar to competence-based questions, but these are more about creating situations and predicting behaviour in certain situations. So if I perhaps talk about how they're created and how they're used in recruitment, and then talk about how they can be used within learning and development. So for a typical situational judgment test in recruitment, you would choose 3 or 4 key competencies that are specific to that particular role, ideally coming from a competency framework to measure a candidate against. And at that point, an occupational psychologist will spend a day with a client, meeting all the stakeholders, the recruitment teams, line managers, those that are currently in the role, to design real-life scenarios and potential outcomes that will distinguish best and worst performers. Alongside creating those questions, then a scoring matrix, and then a series of questions that can be scenario-based questions. They can be questions like the most and least likely behaviour in a certain situation, and again, not necessarily any right or wrong answers here, but different gradings that might rank performance. You can have ranking questions: what would you do and in what order? Incorporate video-based SJTs, so being able to provide a video of a particular scenario, really bringing that to life, or an animation of a particular scenario, and then asking a series of questions about that particular scenario. I think where we're seeing this start to use used more within learning and development teams is really for exactly the same purpose of, within recruitment, mapping that to a competency framework, but relatively few organisations currently using this to test their existing employees against a competency framework, which can be so effective to be able to see the existing fits with the competency framework, to be able to drive learning plans and needs that may exist within individuals. Again, a lot of the things that might come out of the assessment aren't necessarily things that you wouldn't expect, but they are subjective. An individual, based on their performance, can be given feedback based on that. And where we really see this adding great value is when there is a restructure of roles or restructure of the competency-based framework within change management situations, or where there's been mergers or acquisitions within organisations. So again, another way that outside of knowledge-based testing, assessment can really be adding value. My fifth example is 180 or 360 degree assessments, perhaps one of the more familiar types of assessments that you may come across. Essentially, just to explain, an individual will assess themselves on a group of skills or behaviours, and then for a 180 degree assessment, manager may similarly rank for the same questions the employees and those that sit under them. For a 360 degree assessment, that can start to include subordinates and peers. So you get a holistic view of how an individual would rank themselves and how others would rank them on the same skills and behaviours. Another value here is in the reporting, being able to view on an individual level how an individual may rank themselves on certain skills, how that may compare to a manager. To see the difference between how an individual and a manager may rank them on particular skills and behaviours. How that actually varies by group within an organisation, by manager, by team, by role, by location, any of those metrics, you've actually got all of the data to compare and contrast how individuals may rank themselves, how managers may rank individuals, and what the strengths and weaknesses, including across a whole organisation, may exist. And there's lots of different ways to deliver this reporting and provide this kind of feedback. And all of this feedback can be provided potentially to an individual, and potentially to a line manager, and potentially to learning and development teams on a more holistic basis. Next example that I'm going to share, my penultimate example, and a personal favourite for me, is being able to look at measuring confidence, and particularly measuring that against competence. So this started with one of our clients who actually within their call centres had the requirements for the confidence in knowledge was at least as important as them actually having that knowledge. The fact that they could display that confidently to a customer, to talk with confidence, was every bit as important as actually having that knowledge in the first place. But how do you measure this? Well, one way of doing that is obviously a series of knowledge-based assessments on a particular topic, asking the individual what their confidence in knowledge on that particular topic may be, because this then provides the opportunity to map the two together, to see how they've performed in terms of their knowledge and their competency, but to map that against their confidence. I can identify two key areas that can be addressed. Those that have knowledge but don't have confidence that reflects that, and this can then be used with personalised feedback and with learning interventions to actually provide that confidence and demonstrate to an individual that do have the knowledge to be confident on that particular topic. Or the adverse of that, where an individual doesn't necessarily have the knowledge but does have the confidence, and perhaps the more worrying scenario where they think they know what they're talking about but actually don't. My final example to share is on observational tests. So tests by assessors or managers who are observing the behaviour or performance of an individual, perhaps for quality assurance, and being able to provide to a customised assessment that has a scoring matrix that may sit behind this. And that scoring matrix based on the importance and weighting of each of these observations that an individual may have found. Just to pose my final question at that point, where you've started using mobile assessment within your organisation, keen to see if anyone has started to embrace the use of assessment through either mobiles or tablets in their organisation currently. There's lots of no's coming through, and I guess that would be that would be expected at this stage. But I think we're again seeing a real shift of assessment to mobile and tablet devices. And the observational assessments are obviously one great fit for that. So being able to have observational assessments taking place in the field via a mobile device or via a tablet, and having all of that data that's then fed back in real time to head office or central teams, so they can see and assess that on individual basis, again on group basis, or on an organisational basis. So that's brought me to the end of my presentation, and keen to really take on some questions from all of you this morning. Just whilst some of those questions perhaps come through, any questions that you have both on this particular presentation and on assessments generally, just left up there on the screen my personal contact details for the Test Factory, and links to a couple of white papers. As Don said, the presentation is available to download for LSG members. So there's a couple of links to white papers that you might find useful.
And I'll drop those links, which are kind of small at the moment, into the text chat area very, very shortly. Let me just ask one question that came up straight away there at the end. You were talking about assessment. How do we if we're doing an assessment of somebody on a mobile device, although I suppose actually it applies to anything, is that actually the person that we're expecting to answer the question?
That's a great question, and that's something that comes up in recruitment tests all the time. How do you know that the person taking the test, if they're taking it in an uninvigilated environment, is the person that they say are, or indeed isn't getting any help from anyone else? And there is only one simple answer to that. In an uninvigilated environment, you cannot guarantee that. You know, there are various mechanisms that we can do to lock down a PC, for example, so that they can't access the internet while they're taking an assessment. But ultimately, if it's being taken in an uninvigilated environment, you cannot guarantee that the person is the person that they should be. You can ask questions, obviously, to try and verify that, but you can't then guarantee that they're not getting help or they're not using other resources. That's really where mobile assessments have a place within certain areas. So, a perfect example might be that kind of observational assessment where the manager is being asked to observe their team, provide something like an invigilator code that's specific to that particular manager, so that you can ensure that it is that manager that's taking that particular assessment, and being able to manage that accordingly.
And that's a really good point, and I think actually Eddie Stevens has mentioned this a couple of times during the course of the chat. The role of the manager. I think we've seen, and it's becoming increasing practice, that we're having people not check up on people with a checkboard necessarily, but perhaps observe somebody's in their work and score that, and that's our point in a second about observable behaviour, and have a conversation. Eddie's quite keen on this. Have a conversation with the person to discuss the behaviour. And Eddie's point, which he's made a couple of times, which I think is a good one, is that these things can be a good or a bad tool in anybody's hands, but it's a great tool if you've used it, and this happened very effectively, as a tool to take out some of the sting of the subjectivity and provide an objective way of assessing how somebody's actually doing their job. And we can say, well, actually, you to be doing these things here, you're doing things here instead. Here are the gaps, and let's talk about how we can make sure that we're moving from one to the other. Is that some of your experience, Kevin, about how some of this, I was going to say loose, but how testing can be used?
It is. I think there are particular types. I would say, probably the best example, things like the 180 or 360 degree assessments, where you have to think very, very carefully about how you're going to use some of the data that comes out of that. Because clearly it is one person's opinion of another, a manager's opinion of their of one of their team's performance, and be highly emotive. And providing that as raw data back to an individual comes very much with dangers. I think for that kind of assessment particularly, you really need to consider what you're going to do with some fantastic data and some data that really allows you to develop individuals, teams, and the whole organisation. But how you're going to use that does become key, and in the wrong way can obviously cause damage and harm.
Of course, you're right, Kevin. And I remember myself when I was a manager, I was a particularly unpopular manager. We'd had a company. I was put in to manage the newly bought company, and it'd been managed by a very charismatic, great guy beforehand. And suddenly I was put in, this guy nobody knew. And I think I was the most unpopular man in London, and at the time there was a 360-degree anonymous of my performance, which I have to say made very dismal reading. So you do have to be careful with that data. Bernard Thierry adds it's also highly confidential, and there may be some results of surveys that we have to be careful about from a security point of view.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, a couple of questions coming in here, which I'm not sure if there is an answer for, but I think we should just have a look at it. Ben Watson says, how do you measure ROI? And then we had a bit of a discussion about what the ROI is actually looking at. And I just want to get this clear. There are two things we could talk about with ROI. And Becky, that's why I asked the question back to you. ROI of what? There's using this test mechanism as a tool in which to demonstrate ROI of learning, for example. And on the other hand, are we looking at, we showed the return on investment of actually investing in the delivery of tests themselves. So there's two questions in mind. Kevin, do you want to just give us your take on showing value and tests?
So I think this varies hugely from organisation to organisation, because it really depends on what the purpose of the assessment is, what the potential outcomes of that assessment are, to really even start to talk about what the return on investment may be. If I give you examples and talk about where this really does deliver ROI, and I'll give a couple of specific examples as well. One of the ways that we predominantly see assessment being used increasingly today is to actually increase the adoption of e-learning and the use of learning resources that already exist. So being able to use assessment as a tool where individuals can recognise themselves their strengths and weaknesses and their development areas, and to provide them with that personalised feedback or those personalised learning plans that hold their hand and take them to the resources that are most appropriate for them, engaging them in e-learning, helping them take responsibility for their own development, and the ROI being then the increased adoption in those kind of instances of e-learning and e-learning resources. Another very, very different example, but one with a very, very clear ROI, and this again comes down to the purpose of the assessment. One of the programs that we run with Microsoft is the Windows 7 deployment program. Now, the business challenge that Microsoft have here is that an IT professional within an IT team, particularly in small organisations, has no idea whether they have the right skill set to deploy Windows 7, and that can stop them actually making the purchase. And huge amounts of resources available to help them, but how do you know what you don't know? So assessment, and it was one of the first screens that I showed there. It's a series of 11 modules, basically provides that personalised plan. So that individual then can either be told that they do have the appropriate skills, or is the areas that they can develop in order to have those. The return on investment being very simply that there is an uplift in sales of, in this instance, of Windows 7 licenses, and that's the objective. So it really comes down to what is the objective of the assessment, what are business challenges that the assessment can help overcome, and they're many and very varied. But that's where we work with clients to ensure that we are in understanding with that assessment and what the objectives are and how that can provide that business benefit and that ROI.
Thank you for that. And the discussion, just to illuminate it, went on a little bit further. Sam Humphreys, Eddie Stevenson, Robin Lyle, and Carol Teacher, all pitching in with different perspectives. So just if I can summarise it, we had a discussion about ROI and ROE, the difference between return on investment, which is something which I think is a bit of a pot of gold end of the rainbow, which you can chase after, but it's difficult to find in terms of the strict accounting measure of return on investment. Return on expectation. In other words, have you helped people actually get to, managers in particular, get to the point they want to get to, which is what we're discussing here, which is are we able to make a better and more workforce through the learning interventions or other things that are measured through the assessment, which is much more what we're talking about here. And part of that, I think, comes back to Sam Humphrey's question and this issue of observational assessment. Now, this is an area where we are, I don't want to spend much time on this, but I just want to highlight it for a second, because observational assessment, are people doing what we expect them to do, takes some of the sting out of the idea of people gaming the system. We had the question earlier on, can't people simply give the answer you expect them to give on a question, particularly an SGT? And John James said, can't people simply say what you expect them to say, but not what they actually do? Well, if you're observing people, you see after a bit what they're actually doing rather than what you think they should do. And so, observational assessments, I think, are increasingly valuable. I think we'll increasingly see them being used as a way of showing that people are learning informally on the job and seeing how that's affecting their performance. Sam's point is, doesn't it take a bit of infrastructure to make it efficient? I'm not sure it does. What I think it does take, though, Sam, is a slight change in what managers do and something additional to their role. Taylor says, remember the Johari window effect. The person we know least is ourselves. Peer assessment has much to say for it. Well, you're absolutely right. Apart, of course, from those people who gave those appalling 360-degree assessments of me. Now, just to come back to, you've raised some good points. I'm going to come back to in a minute. But I wanted to raise a point that came up earlier. Mike Morrison said, no, sorry, it wasn't that one. Yes, Mike Morrison said that putting it out and gathering lots of data to assess it is great for large-scale businesses, when you need people in a given role, and this is true particularly of the recruiting side of it, but what about smaller firms where you may have one or just a handful of people undertaking a particular job? Do you find that what you're talking about, Kevin, applies mostly to larger organisations?
Not at all. I think it's all about improving performance of individuals and teams, and there are various solutions to, and typically, obviously, there will be a better fit of types of assessments depending on the size of an organisation. But if you take the Tatry or lots of other similar, there are other assessment companies out there.
Surely not.
Honestly, there are. We, for example, have many off-the-shelf assessments that are perhaps more generic, designed to be more cost-effective. They aren't necessarily about creating scenarios based on a particular role, of which many people within an organisation might be doing the same role in a larger company. They are based around preset competencies, and there are far more effective. There are many effective ways of providing assessment within any size organisation. It's really a case of just providing the best fit and where the best value can be obtained, and in the most timely way.
Fair enough. A further question. This was an interesting one, came much earlier on from Paul Taylor, saying that we were talking about people's confidence or their general assessment about how they're feeling about work. That how do you? There are difficulties about getting people to disclose their emotions openly, depending on the culture of the organisation. How do you ensure, firstly, that they do disclose openly? Secondly, how do you take out or account for such business as the natural swings of mood that you might have because it's Monday morning or you just had an hour with your boss? How do you make sure that you can take account of those different things which will surely alter the results on an individual level?
Well, this is actually where the measuring competence and confidence in the same test is so effective. Because first of all, at the point that you're asked how confident are you on that subject, you've gone through a series of you've potentially gone through a series of questions on that topic, or you're just about to go through a series of questions on that topic. It is going to be reflective in some ways of the knowledge that you feel, because there is going to be a measure of that knowledge that you've either just been through or is just coming up. So it becomes far more difficult to just to hide any lack of confidence when you know that actually that's going to that knowledge is going to be measured. The other thing, though, that we find is that assessment is such an anonymous way of people being able to subtly hold their hand up and say, actually, I'm not that confident. I would like some additional support. I would like some opportunity for further development of that area. Because it's just, it doesn't involve having to start a conversation with the line manager.
Yeah.
It doesn't involve having to admit to a deficiency. Mm-hmm. It's just simply a case of answering a question of how confident you feel, and all the way that assessment can be presented. So 2 ways that can be addressed. First of all, really encourage people to be able to share so that we can help their development where their confidence lies. And secondly, there is actually scientific studies that actually show that even putting on the start of an assessment, please be honest with your answers, actually has an impact on the honesty that people have.
That's fascinating. About the importance of the words you use, Eddie Stevens says that one of the key elements to our assessments is that we have a not sure option. In other words, people don't feel they have to choose some sort of knowledge. 2 questions coming out of what you've just talked about there. I'm going to go to Carol's one first, which is because about the ability to give people pointers towards how they can develop themselves. These tests, which we've been seen so far, are not embedded within a person's day-to-day job. If possible, do you have any examples of assessments which can be delivered just in time when an employee needs it, if they need it, and it's useful in the moment they find valuable? Any idea, any examples of just-in-time assessments?
It's a great question. I think some of the examples that we can provide are when people come to certain triggers within their role. So, for example, as someone goes through an onboarding program, there being certain triggers and assessments to see where their knowledge is up to at that point, see if any intervention is required, where there's a change in role type, where there's been a change in circumstance, a change in manager, someone moving from one team or location to another. All these can be triggered and automated as timely assessments. Also, where is healing resources or wikis that might exist within an organisation, being able to provide assessment at the point where someone's trying to find out information on a particular topic, so being able to align assessments with resources that exist, obviously just make them available in real time whenever is appropriate for each individual. Mm. If I can, Don, I would like to just very quickly pick up on the point you made from Eddie as well. The point about having a not sure option, which Eddie, I absolutely love you. This is a conversation that we have regularly within the test factory about whether that's appropriate and otherwise. I'm a real fan of personally of the not sure option. Because it does, one of the things that does taint multiple choice questions is that they are multiple guess questions. When someone doesn't know the answer, you're forcing them to guess, and they have a 25% chance of being correct, and it doesn't necessarily distinguish those that knew the answer and those that guessed the answer. So 2 ways that can be addressed. One, a not sure option, and we find that highly effective on everything from recruitment tests to skills-based and learning assessments. Secondly, a question that's to it of how confident are you in your answer, where you actually give the people the opportunity to say an educated guess, which is fine, or that I'm absolutely confident that that's the right answer. And it's obviously hard to say I'm confident that's the right answer if you're genuinely not, because that'll show up in the reporting.
That sort of leads on to, and I'll come back, Richard Smith, you've raised a great question, which I'll come back to in a second, but we just said leads on to a good point from Taylor. Everyone's talking like assessment only has to be about summative compliance. Don't forget that it can be diagnostic and formative, which is great for empowering learners to drive their own learning. Traditional supervised assessment can still be used as part of the wider assurance process. And he's honest to say, I say this because I forget it myself all the time. It's a really good point, Andrew, that I think this is the key points about the session here is that we're trying to expand people's view that assessment is not just about sitting down and doing a test. There can be a lot more to it and a lot more to get from it than that. But let's go on to Richard Smith's question. Kevin, do you have any particular job roles or situation where you found the measuring confidence part of what you do most effective or appealing?
I think the best examples are in people that have that customer-facing role, because you're asking them to relay that information to a customer. So whether that be within something like a call centre environment, which was the initial place that we first used that confidence and competence-based question, through to any kind of customer-facing role, retail environment, working in a restaurant, so on and so forth. Where actually having that knowledge is only half the battle. You've got to obviously portray to a customer or a potential customer the confidence that you have in your answer, and the success, particularly within things like sales-based roles.
Yes.
The confidence of an individual is going to have a real relation with how much you trust that individual, how much you trust the information that they're giving you.
I'm saying absolutely. Just want to raise the point of what Eddie's saying here. He's talking about authoring questions, having multiple answer questions where 3 out of 4 of the answers are correct, but the candidate does not know how many correct answers they are. Those are particularly difficult ones to answer. They're also difficult ones to write, and of course there are issues about writing those which do lead to some potentially, not in the UK, but I think particularly in the US, some issues around potential for litigation when people say, well, for whatever reason, this type of, in the way these were written, didn't present me with a fair view, or didn't allow me to show my skills or fairly, because either somebody's educational background or their racial background or whatever. Have you faced any issues with using with any legal issues, Kevin, with high stakes tests like that?
So clearly, the higher stakes the assessment, the more obviously you need to mitigate that risk. That's obviously why a lot of recruitment assessments are written by experts, expert authors that understand the implications, understand the risks that go on with either ensuring that isn't fair, that it is discriminating. So, in things like recruitment tests, you actually have to be very careful about the language that you are using in relation to sexual equality, to diversity, and so on and so forth, to ensure that it is fair for every individual, regardless of any of those attributes, and therefore need to be expertly written. And again, that's where we work with clients to help do that. I think go from that point about the multiple responses as part of that. Just worth noting, and again, Eddie, you make a absolutely brilliant point there. By having which of the following are correct, or highlighting any of the following without necessarily saying a number, which are correct. If you have 5 options, for example, there are 120 particular variables that could be correct. And there's the decision about how you want to mark that. Do you want to mark it only if someone gets all of them correct? So, for example, if there are 3 correct answers, that they correctly identify just those 3. Or you can have partial scoring, where, for example, if someone thought there were 4 correct answers but did identify the 3 correctly, they will be attributed points for the ones that they did get right. So there are various ways that can be done. And the expertise clearly is just in making sure that the content is being written and all appropriately, but is appropriate for the sort of assessment, where it's low stake, where it's all about helping an individual develop, then obviously that risk isn't so great.
I should say, I just explained, I didn't explain, I ran 120 equals 5 exclamation mark, which means 5 factorial. That's where Kevin got his 120 possible answers, or possible combinations of answers from that. John James, the best assessment I ever saw for customer-facing people had multiple choice answers, which were all correct, that told you how likely you were to get the customer's business. That's really fascinating. So, yeah, we accept you're going to get the right answer, but which one is best for the situation? Fascinating. Drew Taylor's just asking a quick question, and either Mark, who I know is on the call as well, or possibly you, Kevin, could help us with this one. Is there any literature out there about assessment authoring, particularly around multiple response questions? So if we can have any pointers that we can help Andrew with, that would be great. As Andrew and I tried to do this for an organisation, we were recruited by Microsoft to do it a long time ago, and it was an immensely complex business. Kevin, any resources for somebody looking to set out and write their own questions? Yeah,
I think Mark's sitting alongside me, and we'll probably put something up in terms of our contact details and whatever as well,
okay,
and how to get in touch. But just to say, the various ways that things can be authored. We have experts in content writing and in question authoring that can actually take things like existing training resources and existing materials and write content that's based on that, but with the expertise of writing the right kind of question and taking a brief on the objectives and the difficulty and so on and so forth, right through to occupational psychologists that will go and work with a client and understand exactly what those objectives and produce something that's very, very specific to that organisation.
And I'm not saying this just because it's Kevin. I'm sure there may be other people out there who can supply the services, but if I was writing a high-stakes test, or a test which I just wanted to make sure was going to do the job for me, and I was ultra confident about the subject matter, the audience and everything else, I would always go to an expert to help me do it, simply because of the people for getting it wrong inadvertently. In other words, I think in the past I have, to put it in Kevin's term, been a high confidence, low competence writer. I think I've now realised that actually my confidence level was a bit misjudged. Let's go and look for an expert. Last question, unless somebody throws any out, and it's raised by Carol, who unfortunately has had to leave. But she was saying, in relation to situational judgment tests, she's saying they don't use tests because there's a fear amongst senior managers about having any sort of common standard. We generally value diversity and tolerate many behaviours which could result in someone being rejected at a standard test. Now, without using that as a specific instance, are there any issues, Kevin, with using testing that do suggest that we're trying to force people into some sort of common standard? This comes back to John James' point earlier about people gaming the system and giving the answer that they expect that you want to hear, rather than actually getting what we want. Is there a possibility that with some testing, like SJTs, we might force ourselves into a situation whereby we're having a very false dialogue? We're saying a question which we know the person is going to not really give a truthful answer to, but they give the right answer that they think that we expect them to answer, if you see what I mean. Kevin, can you make sense of that?
I do. I think she's actually where, like, maybe just a little bit of a misconception about situational judgment tests, because you're not necessarily you are looking for competencies, not a personality type. And so those competencies could be, for example, the ability to work as part of a team, or whatever those competencies may be, that are already designated as important for that particular role. So these are competencies that you undoubtedly are looking for that particular role in every individual. There will obviously be lots of personality traits that will be individual, and you want, as I think, was it Carol you said, it
was Carol,
question, that you will want a diversity of different personalities within an organisation or teams, but there are competencies that are key. And the way that expert situational judgment tests are put together by occupational psychologists who are expert in doing this are done in such a way that there is very I think just a little bit. Someone made the point about the best test that they'd ever seen. All the answers answers were correct. Very much the case in situational judgment tests that you're not necessarily putting wrong answers there. You're just putting different grades of correctness, and better looking for scenarios where the best people that have, for example, abilities to work effectively as part of a team are making different decisions for those that aren't as good as in working as a team, but they're not necessarily wrong. So if I can just very quickly share my favourite example question from a situational judgment test, which does perfectly illustrate where there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but there's different grades of that. Within one of the supermarket chains, there's for store assistants who are essentially stacking shelves. Many people that are applying for that kind of role don't necessarily realise that it is a customer-facing role, and therefore there's lots of people that are applying that don't necessarily have the right skill set. One of the questions within that test is that a bottle of wine is knocked over by a member of the public, smashes on the floor, there's glass and wine on the role that you're working on. Which of the following would you do? None of them are wrong answers, but there are clearly ones that would be better ways of dealing with that situation, and that situation of being in a customer-facing role, making those kind of decisions. It isn't a personality trait, it is about someone that has the best competencies and that you're predicting the behaviour that they will show in such a scenario.
Okay, that is a really good example, and I think it does make things a bit clearer, and brings us back to this whole point about the value of using testing beyond the multiple choice question of just quickly checking whether in people's short-term memory has been occupied by the knowledge we just dumped on them during a transfer course. It's been a really interesting discussion. I really like the fact that we've provided this session equally between presentation and discussion. I've always found that you get a lot out of it that way. I'm going to, unless there's a pressing question that's coming through, I'm going to wrap up and just quickly go through to my outro slides, as we call them. I'm not sure that's a real word, but there we are. Anyway, if you've found the webinar useful, please do let people know about it on Twitter. That's the hashtag #LSGwebinar. If you want to pick up on the recording and on the text chat and on the PDF of the slides, they will all be available on the Learning and Skills Group website. If you are a member but would like to be, simply go to that box in the right-hand corner and sign yourself up. We will approve your membership and you are in the door, able to download stuff. Our next webinars are, as always, in 2 weeks' time. We're on a 2-week schedule now, so keep the date of the 20th of September free, please, for those. And yes, I must say, Sunita says it was interesting. The pace was a bit quick for me to grasp it all. So yeah, we do go through it quite a fast pace. I do talk reasonably quickly. I apologise for that. We do want to. No, I don't apologise. It's not you. It's me driving the pace of it. The idea though is to try to get a lot in, and then the bits you're interested in, you can come back and tackle later on through recording. So please join the session. Please join the Learning and Skills Groups in Cinta. I hope that you'll be able to get extra value out of the recording and the PDF of the slides as well. And of course, Kevin will be open for any questions you may have. Thank you for your participation, your contribution, questions and thoughts during the course of the webinar. Of course, thank you to Kevin. Great job looking at other ways, other thoughts of assessment beyond what we commonly accept it to be. I hope I'll see you guys online on the 20th of September for our next 2 webinars. Thank you very much.